The court grand hall grew quiet. My son-in-law shoved past me, knocked on my paper coffee cup directly onto the marble floor. He pointed a finger straight at my face and spat out, "Get out of the way, old man. You don't belong here." My daughter stood beside him, staring at her shoes without saying a single word. I simply picked up the crushed paper cup, smiled softly, and walked away. 10 minutes later, the bailiff's voice boomed through the room. "All rise." My son-in-law glanced up at the bench. The second he realized I was the one presiding over the biggest trial of his entire career, his face turned completely ghostly white. Before we keep going, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. It truly means the world to me. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from, your city, your country. I'd love to see who is here sharing this story with me. Just a quick note. This story contains creative embellishments for narrative depth, and all names and locations are fictional. But the core lessons are as real as it gets. I want to tell you about the exact evening I realized what it truly meant to fade away, not just from a room, but from my own daughter's life. It was a crisp Houston evening in October, one of those rare nights where you can actually feel fall in Texas. I spent the entire afternoon cooking rosemary roasted chicken, just like my late wife Margaret used to make every single Sunday, mashed potatoes whipped by hand, and a peach pie cooling on the counter because Emily had loved it ever since she was 6 years old. She had called me that morning, her voice bright but carrying a subtle edge of nerves. "Dad, I want you to meet someone. Can we come over for dinner tonight?" "Of course you can," I told her. "Anytime." I set out our finest china, the set Margaret picked out the year we moved into this house. I folded the napkins just like she taught me and lit a single candle right in the middle of the table, even though I felt a bit silly doing it all by myself. I was 64, a retired judge setting a romantic table just because my daughter was bringing home a man she wanted me to meet. My heart felt fuller than it had in years. They arrived right at 7. Emily looked absolutely beautiful. Her dark hair was pinned back and she wore a blue dress I'd never seen before, wearing a radiant smile. Standing right beside her was Daniel Brooks. Tall, early 30s, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He carried himself with the kind of aggressive confidence that fills a room before the person even crosses the threshold. His eyes swept across my living room, like a real estate appraiser scanning a foreclosed property, quick, cold, and already calculating its worth. He said, looking around. "Cozy, very simple." He shot a glance at Emily. "I had no idea you grew up like this." Emily's smile flickered for a fraction of a second. "Dad worked really hard for this house, Daniel." Sure, he nodded, still looking around without touching a thing. "Lots of character." I stepped forward and extended my hand. "Richard Dawson. Good to meet you, son." He shook my hand, firm and brief. "Daniel Brooks." Then he immediately glanced down at his phone. We sat down to eat. I served the chicken, potatoes, and green beans I'd been simmering since 4 in the afternoon. Daniel stared down at his plate like a man handed a dish he never ordered. "I don't really do home-cooked meals," he announced, slicing off a tiny piece of chicken with precise efficiency before setting his fork right back down. "Too much sodium, too much oil." He looked at my daughter. "Emily, why didn't you tell him we prefer dining out?" My daughter's cheeks turned crimson. "Daniel, please, it's fine, it's good." He was already typing on his phone, thumbs flying. "I'll just order delivery. You mentioned there was a decent Thai place nearby." He was in my house, sitting at my table, ordering takeout right in front of me, while I sat there with 4 hours of work resting on my plate. I kept eating. I asked about his job. He was a defense attorney, and he made sure to tell me he was one of the sharpest lawyers in Houston, a little detail he added all on his own. I asked how they met, and he gave me a dry 3-sentence summary before turning to Emily to discuss a client dinner on Thursday. After dinner, during which Daniel ate maybe 4 bites out of a plastic container, they moved to the living room. I started clearing the table. Through the cracked door, I could hear his voice clear as day. "You've lived here 40 years and never renovated?" His voice was casual, like he was talking about the weather. That's either deeply humble or completely stagnant. I can't quite tell which. My hands gripped the edge of the dinner plate, one of Margaret's good plates. Emily murmured something too soft for me to catch. "I'm just saying," Daniel continued, "first impressions matter, and this place gives off a very specific impression." I washed the dishes slowly and methodically, the way Margaret taught me. Rinse, soap, rinse again. Don't rush. Let the hot water do the work. When they came to say goodbye, Emily wrapped her arms around me at the door, holding on tight for a long moment with her chin resting on my shoulder, just like she did when she was a little girl. "Thank you for dinner, Dad. It was delicious. Drive safe," I told her. Daniel shook my hand again at the door. Same firm, brief grip. Then he looked back at the living room, taking in the worn sofa, the framed family photos, and the entire life Margaret and I had built, and something crossed his face. It wasn't quite contempt. It was closer to total indifference, the look you give something that has zero relevance to your life. "Nice meeting you, Richard," he said. He hadn't used a title with me all night. "No, sir. No, Mr. Dawson." And now, leaving my house, he used my first name, like he was addressing a parking attendant. I watched their car back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Then I went back to the kitchen, finished the rest of the dishes, and wrapped the peach pie in foil. Daniel hadn't even touched it. I sat at the kitchen table drinking cold coffee, thinking about the way he evaluated my home, thinking about how he made the word simple sound like a medical diagnosis. I realized then that his smile, over the course of 3 full hours, had never once reached his eyes. Not even once. I told myself I was overthinking it. First impressions can be deceiving. Emily was happy, and that was all that mattered. I kept telling myself that for 2 whole years, right up until the phone calls stopped altogether. People say distance is measured in miles. What I learned is that true distance is measured in missed calls and doors that won't open. During that first year after dinner, things seemed mostly normal. Emily usually called around noon on Sundays. We talked about her jewelry designs, the Houston heat, the backyard garden Margaret planted before she got sick. Small, comfortable things that made a phone call feel like home. But sometime into the second year, those Sunday calls started sliding. Noon became 3 in the afternoon. 3 became evening. And eventually, evening turned into nothing at all. Instead, I'd get a short text. "Super busy today. Call you later. Love you." She never called later. I started keeping track, an old habit from my decades on the bench. When something doesn't make sense, you document it. I bought a small brown notebook and wrote down the time, date, duration, and a brief note of every single conversation. From January to June of that second year, 11 calls. Average duration, 6 minutes. From July to December, 4 calls. Average duration, 3 minutes. One Sunday in October, I dialed her number. A man's voice answered. "Hello, smooth, unhurried." "Daniel," I said. "Is Emily there?" "She's busy." A pause followed, not long, but deliberate. Being a wife and a mother is a full-time job. Honestly, if you'd been around more while she was growing up, you'd understand that. My jaw tightened. I raised her on my own after. "She can't talk right now." Another pause, and then his tone dropped, almost conversational. "Besides, Richard, she's doing just fine. You don't need to check up on her like she's 12 years old." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone for a long time, my thumb hovering over her name. I wanted to call back. I wanted to drive straight across Houston, knock on that door, and demand to see my daughter to make sure she was truly all right. But I didn't. Instead, I wrote it down. "Date, time," Daniel answered. Call ended at 2:14 p.m. Next, the invitation stopped completely. For 2 years, I was still invited to the awkward, formal holiday gatherings, where Daniel held court while I sat quietly in the corner. But at least I was in the room. Then I received a text on Thanksgiving. "Dad, we're keeping things simple this year. Just the 3 of us. Hope you have a great day." In November, the anniversary of Margaret's passing arrived. I bought her favorite white roses and placed them on the kitchen table where she used to sit. I expected Emily around 2 in the afternoon. She had come over every single year since her mother passed. By 4, I called her. "Oh, Dad." Her voice sank. "I'm so sorry. Daniel had a last-minute work thing, a big client dinner, and I had to go with him. I should have called you earlier." "It's all right," I said. "I feel terrible. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll get together real soon. Real soon came and went. It always did. For her birthday that December, I drove across Houston with a card and a gift, a delicate silver bracelet engraved with her name and her mother's birthday. Two meaningful dates etched into a thin band of silver. I rang the doorbell. Daniel opened the door in his dress shirt, no jacket, wearing that calculated posture of relaxation people use when they want you to know they own the place. Richard. It wasn't a greeting, just a confirmation of my presence. I wanted to drop this off for Emily, I said, holding up the small gift bag. Is she around? He looked at the bag like it was unwanted junk mail. She's putting Olivia down for a nap. Now really isn't a good time. I won't stay long, I just want to give it to her myself. He reached out, snatched the bag from my hand, and shut the door right in my face before I could finish my sentence. I stood on that porch for a moment, then walked back to my car. 2 weeks later, I asked Emily on the phone if she received the bracelet. Oh yes. There was a half-second pause before she answered, just a fraction too long. It's beautiful, Dad. I love it. Are you wearing it? Silence. I'm saving it for a special occasion. I didn't push, I just wrote it down. The call that shattered everything came on a Tuesday afternoon. Emily called out of nowhere, which was rare in itself, and her voice sounded paper. Thin, like she was holding it carefully so it wouldn't break apart. Dad, can I ask you something? Anything. When I was little, when it was just the two of us, were you happy? Like truly happy? My throat tightened. I gripped the phone harder. Those were the happiest years of my entire life, Emily. Why are you asking me that? No reason. The answer came too fast. I've just been thinking. About what? I don't know. She let out a shaky breath, and my chest constricted like a fist squeezing my heart. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, and I can't remember when I stopped living my own. Emily, my voice was deeper than I intended. Talk to me. I'm fine, Dad. Just like that, the door slammed shut again, exactly like Daniel closing it on the porch. I have to pick up Olivia from school. I'll call you this weekend. She didn't call that weekend. But after hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, opened that brown notebook, and flipped back through 2 years of dates, durations, and short notes. I read them the way I used to read legal briefs, looking for the underlying patterns beneath the raw facts. It was right there, as clear as a judicial verdict. Emily wasn't just drifting away. Someone was systematically pulling the cord. I closed the notebook. I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the peach tree, at the garden Margaret planted the year before she got sick, and at the quiet, simple life I had built in this house. Something was happening in my daughter's home, something she couldn't name yet, or wasn't allowed to name. I just didn't know how hard he was willing to push, or how far he would go to ensure she never found her way back. He invited me over for Christmas that year. I should have known right then that an invitation from Daniel Brooks always came with a hidden price tag. Emily was the one who called, not him. She sounded almost apologetic, like she was delivering news she wasn't sure I'd want to hear. Daniel thought it would be nice to have you over for the holidays, Dad. We're hosting a few of his colleagues. It's going to be a nice party. I'll be there, I told her. I put on my finest navy suit, the one I bought for Margaret's funeral and had probably only worn 4 times since. I polished my shoes. I picked up a bottle of decent Cabernet from a shop downtown and wrapped a small gift for Olivia, Emily's daughter, my granddaughter, who had just turned 4 and whom I had only seen twice in her life. Daniel and Emily's home was located in West Houston, a neighborhood where every lawn looked professionally manicured and every driveway held cars that cost more than most people's mortgages. The house was lit up like a luxury hotel lobby, with strings of bright lights tracing the roofline and a wreath the size of a wagon wheel on the front door. It was the kind of Christmas meant for photo ops, not actual warmth. A catering staff member I'd never seen before opened the door. Inside, the party was already in full swing. 40 people, maybe more, packed into a living room large enough to swallow my entire house. Lawyers and their wives, corporate executives, firm handshakes, and booming laughter. This was a crowd that wore their wealth the way other people wear perfume. You could smell it long before you even saw them. Daniel spotted me from across the room. Holding a glass of bourbon, he walked toward me with that slick, practiced smile he used like a corporate tool. "Ah, Richard." He grabbed my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like positioning me than welcoming me. "Glad you could make it." He turned to a broad-shouldered man in an expensive blazer standing beside him. "Tom, this is Emily's father. He's retired. Used to do some legal work back in the day. Nothing major." He delivered the line with a light chuckle, the kind that silently invited the other man to laugh along. Tom offered a polite smile. "Richard, Tom here is a senior partner at Harrington and Cole, one of the top firms in the state." I shook Tom's hand. "Richard Dawson, good to meet you." Tom opened his mouth to reply, but Daniel was already steering him away. "Tom, you've got to hear about the settlement Marcus landed last month." And just like that, I was left standing alone in the middle of my daughter's Christmas party, holding a bottle of wine no one had bothered to take from my hands. I found a quiet spot near the fireplace and just stood there, taking in the room. Decades of old habits, 40 years on the bench, teach you to observe long before you speak. After standing there for 15 minutes, I heard her voice. "Grandpa." I turned around. Olivia was running across the hardwood floor in red pajamas covered in little reindeer. Her arms were wide open, and her face held the pure, unreserved joy that only a 4-year-old can express. She crashed into me at full speed, wrapping her arms around my legs and nearly knocking us both over. I caught her and steadied myself. My heart, which had been sitting like a cold stone in my chest all evening, cracked open just a little bit. "Well, hello there, little one." I kneeled down to her eye level, my voice sounding rougher than I expected. "Did you bring me a present?" she asked immediately. I let out a genuine laugh, my first real smile of the night. "I just might have." I picked her up and carried her over to a chair by the window, away from the loud noise. Sitting on my lap, she rambled endlessly about her preschool teacher, a dog she saw down the street that she named Cookie, and how their Christmas tree was the biggest one in the whole wide world. "Grandpa," I measured it with my arms. For 20 minutes, the party completely melted away. It was just the two of us by the window, her small, warm body resting on my lap. Her voice filled up every quiet void that had been building inside my chest for the past 2 years. Then Daniel appeared, Olivia. His tone cut right through her story about the imaginary dog Cookie like a blade slicing paper. "Come here, Mommy needs you." Olivia squirmed on my lap. "But I'm talking to Grandpa. Olivia, now." She slid off my lap, making a playful goodbye face at me. "Bye, Grandpa." She hurried off toward her father. Daniel didn't even look at me. He placed a firm hand on Olivia's shoulder, guiding her toward the kitchen. Right before they turned the corner, he bent down and whispered something directly into her ear. Whatever he said, Olivia didn't look back again. I remained sitting in that chair by the window while the party carried on around me. Someone poured another glass of wine nearby. A group burst into laughter over a story I couldn't hear. It was only then that I noticed the bottle of wine I brought was still sitting untouched on the kitchen counter. The wrapped gift for Olivia was nowhere to be found. Daniel had taken it from me at the door, and it had simply vanished from existence. I glanced across the room at Emily. She was standing by the dining table talking to a colleague's wife, laughing at something. For a split second, her eyes met mine, and her laughter instantly froze. A sudden expression flashed across her face, not guilt, but deep sadness. Then Daniel moved in right beside her, leaning down to whisper something in her ear, and her attention snapped back to the conversation like a stretched rubber band springing back into place. I walked over to the coat rack by the door and grabbed my jacket. Nobody noticed me leave. Outside, the cold December wind hit my face like a slap, sharp and shockingly refreshing after the oppressive heat of the crowded room. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared through the windshield at the brightly lit house. Driving home that night, a thought kept echoing in my mind. What was Olivia being taught about me when I wasn't in the room? Did Emily even remember the man I used to be before Daniel decided who I was allowed to be? There is a very specific kind of pain that comes from standing outside your own daughter's life like a stranger. I knew that pain intimately now, and knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. It was December of Emily's 4th year of marriage, a gloomy Houston morning where the sky couldn't decide whether to rain or stay freezing cold, so it chose to do both. Olivia was turning 5. I had been thinking about her birthday gift for weeks. Nothing flashy or expensive, nothing that would draw another sarcastic comment about discount store wrapping paper. I found a local craftsman in the Heights who made handcrafted wooden toys. His painted animals with movable joints felt like something a child could cherish for years rather than weeks. I had him carve a little horse, brown with a white mane, the perfect size for Olivia, with legs that could actually pose. I tried calling 3 times that week. Once on Monday, once Wednesday morning, and again Thursday evening. Every single call went straight to voicemail. Emily's recorded voice sounded bright and rehearsed, not quite like herself. On Saturday morning, I decided to make the drive across Houston anyway. The gift was wrapped neatly in yellow paper, her favorite color. Emily had mentioned it offhandedly months ago, and I had noted it down in my brown book. I had become that kind of father. A man who writes down his granddaughter's favorite color because he doesn't trust the world to give him another chance to use it. When I arrived, the neighborhood was completely quiet. I pulled up to the security gate, a heavy iron barrier designed to send a clear message. Whatever lies inside belongs only to those with the power to decide who gets in. I pressed the intercom button, a pause. Then Daniel's voice came through the speaker, flat and impatient. "Who is it?" "It's Richard," I said. "I brought a birthday gift for Olivia." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "We're not taking visitors today." My hands tightened around the gift under my arm. "It's her birthday, Daniel. I'm not a visitor. I'm her grandfather. I just want to give her. She has everything she needs." His voice didn't rise or turn sharp, which made it so much worse than anger. It was the voice of a man who didn't care in the slightest about what he was doing. "We don't need secondhand affection wrapped in discount paper." The intercom clicked off. The gate remained shut. I stood right there on the sidewalk outside the iron gate, holding a wooden toy wrapped in yellow paper. For a long time, I couldn't move. The icy morning air stung my face. Down the street, someone's automatic sprinkler system clicked on, sounding absurdly cheerful in the dead of winter. After standing at that gate for what felt like an eternity, I did something I hadn't done before. I pressed the intercom button a second time. "Daniel, I'm not leaving until you tell Emily I was here. That's all I'm asking. Tell her." Silence. The speaker hissed once, then went dead. I knelt down and placed the gift gently on the ground, right in front of the gate. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting against the freezing concrete. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Emily a brief text message. Just 5 words. "I came by today, sweetheart." She never replied. But I needed her to know I hadn't stopped trying. That was the difference between this time and every time before. I wasn't just walking away anymore. I was building a record. I walked back to my car. I don't even remember the drive home. I only remember pulling into my driveway and sitting in the car for a long time, hands resting on my lap, looking through the windshield at the peach tree. Margaret had planted it the spring before she got sick. It still bore fruit every single summer, stubborn and beautiful, as if following instructions she had left behind. Inside the house, I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat at the table. My phone showed no missed calls, no messages, no text from Emily saying, "I heard what happened," or "Dad, I'm so sorry," or even, "Did you really come by?" That meant one of 2 things. Either Daniel never told her, or he did, and she felt unable to reach out. Either way, the silence spoke louder than words ever could. I opened the brown notebook on the table, the one I had been using to document everything since the Sunday calls started fading. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote down the date. I wrote, "Drove to the house. Gate locked. Left gift at the entrance." Then I put the pen down and stared at the words. What a tiny plain record for something so devastating. My eyes burned, not quite with tears, but with the heavy pressure behind them, the kind that builds up when you've held things in for so long your body forgets how to let them out. I pinched the bridge of my nose with 2 fingers and took a slow, deliberate breath. Margaret used to tell me, "You process life like you're writing a legal opinion. You don't feel first, Richard. You analyze, you file, you cross-reference. She mostly said it with love, though sometimes with a touch of helplessness. She was right, so I did what I always do. I began to analyze. Emily didn't text back. That was a data point. Emily's calls had grown shorter and rarer over 2 solid years. That was a pattern. Emily's voice on the phone had become cautious, quiet, and deeply rehearsed, like someone speaking with a shadow hovering over her shoulder. That was evidence. And then there was Daniel's statement. She has everything she needs. Delivered without malice, just simple, absolute authority, like stating an undeniable fact about the weather. That was not the voice of an overprotective husband. That was the voice of a man who had long ago decided what belonged to him, and who had the right to access it. I picked up the pen again. Underneath the note about the gate, I wrote 5 words. She didn't choose this life. I stared at them, read them 3 times, and then added a few more. It was imposed on her. I closed the notebook, stood up, poured my tea, and stood at the kitchen window, looking out at Margaret's peach tree. By late December, its branches were completely bare against the gray sky. Something was happening in that house across Houston, something Emily couldn't name or wasn't allowed to address. For 2 years, I had tried to convince myself she was an adult making her own choices, that the distance between us was normal, and that I needed to step back and let her build her life. Standing at that kitchen window, I stopped telling myself those lies. My daughter wasn't drifting away. She was being systematically isolated. What I didn't know at the time was that on the very same evening I sat writing in my notebook, something was happening in that house across town. Something Emily would carry in silence for a very long time. It was late spring on a Thursday afternoon when I went over without calling first. I told myself it was spontaneous, that I just happened to be driving through that part of Houston and wanted to drop by. The truth was, ever since writing those words in my notebook, I had spent 3 days sitting in my house, feeling the walls close in on me. It was April, the weather was warming up, and the Houston air smelled like freshly cut grass and sweet honeysuckle. I parked 2 houses down, not intentionally, but simply because it was the open spot on the curb. I walked down the sidewalk toward Emily and Daniel's home with no real plan, just a desperate need to see my daughter's face. I got close enough that before I could even reach the front porch to knock, I heard their voices. A side window in the living room was cracked open an inch or two, the way people leave windows when the air conditioning feels too cold and the breeze outside is pleasant. I was walking along the side of the house, preparing to round the corner to the front door, when Daniel's voice carried through that narrow gap, sharp and precise. "If you see your father one more time without letting me know first." His voice was low and measured, the voice of a man who knows true control never requires shouting. "I will call my attorney first thing tomorrow morning. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I froze in my tracks. My hand stayed suspended in midair, halfway through my stride. Emily's voice answered back, her tone trembling at the edges. "Daniel, he's my father. He's Olivia's grandfather. I can't just..." "You can't just what?" A brief pause followed. I could hear his shoes pacing across the hardwood floor. "Do you honestly believe a family court judge is going to award custody of Olivia to an unemployed woman with no income, whose father is a bitter old man clinging to the past?" "Just try it, Emily. Go ahead and try. I'm not unemployed. I'm substitute teaching. When someone calls in sick, I make $14 an hour." His voice dropped even lower, which somehow made the whole situation so much worse. "Without me, you don't stand a chance in court. So the next time you think about running off to your daddy, ask yourself if Olivia is really worth losing." Emily's voice broke on the very next word. Just a tiny crack, but it was enough. "That's not fair. Life isn't fair." Somewhere deeper in the house, a door opened. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." I heard his footsteps fade away. A second later, a short, sharp gasp came from Emily. That sudden, stifled sound your body makes when you're desperately trying to hold back tears and your throat betraying you for just 1 second. My legs went completely numb and unsteady. I pressed my back hard against the exterior wall of my daughter's home. Every single fragment of memory from the past 4 years rearranged itself in my mind, like heavy furniture violently thrown across a room. She wasn't trying to push me away. She was protecting Olivia the entire time. Every single ignored call, every locked gate, every carefully rehearsed, "I'm fine." That exact tone that meant anything but. She hadn't chosen Daniel over me. She had been calculating every single day what it would cost her daughter if she didn't obey. I pressed my fist tight against my mouth, breathing slowly through my nose. My eyes burned, not with dry frustration anymore, but with a searing heat, something desperate that wanted to break out, something I couldn't afford to release. I didn't knock. I couldn't knock. If I walked through that front door right now, Daniel would get the exact ammunition he needed. Clear proof that Emily was in contact with me behind his back, a weapon ready for whichever attorney he had on speed dial. Trying to intervene directly would only make things so much worse for her. So, I forced myself to walk back to my car. Every step felt deliberate and heavy, like wading through thick water. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel. From the outside, the house looked completely quiet. It looked so ordinary, a nice neighborhood, manicured lawns, clean lines, a perfect place for a photo, and a beautiful place to hide a nightmare. I drove home. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 3 full years. I walked into the spare bedroom, the room I had converted into a small home office after retiring, and pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Deep inside, buried beneath old case files and a retirement plaque I never bothered to hang, lay a business card. An old friend from my years on the bench. A top-tier family law attorney in Harris County. I picked up the phone. "Arthur," I said when he answered. "It's Richard Dawson. I need to consult with you on a hypothetical scenario." "Richard." Warmth radiated through his voice. "It's been years. What's on your mind?" "Hypothetically," I said, choosing every word with extreme care. "If a woman wants to leave a marriage, but her husband controls every single asset, every bank account, every financial line, and uses custody as a direct threat, what options does she actually have?" Arthur went silent for a moment. It was the deliberate pause of a seasoned lawyer evaluating a complex file. "Hypothetically speaking," he repeated softly, "she needs paper documentation, clear evidence of financial control, written records of threats if she has them. And she needs someone to cover her legal costs, because if he controls the money, she can't fight back without outside backing." "What if she refuses outside help?" I asked. "What if she's too terrified to accept it?" Another long pause. Then she has to reach a breaking point where the fear of staying outweighs the fear of walking away. He hesitated briefly. "Richard, is this really just a hypothetical?" My jaw set firmly. "When it stops being hypothetical, I'll call you back," I said. "Thank you, Arthur." I hung up and sat in the dark office, holding the card in my hand. I had made a phone call, but the answers proved this wasn't something a single conversation, or even a brilliant attorney, could solve on its own. Not just yet. While I was trying to figure out how to save my daughter, the very man isolating her was busy taking on the biggest and dirtiest case of his career. I found out the way I learned most things back then. Sitting alone with a cup of coffee, the morning paper spread across my kitchen table. It was a Tuesday in May, roughly 3 weeks after I stood outside that side window and heard Daniel's voice. Sleep had been hard to come by, broken hours, waking up at 3 in the morning with my heart pounding from dreams I couldn't remember. I was up early, brewed a pot of dark coffee, and sat down with the Houston Chronicle. The headline was right on the bottom half of the front page. "Prominent defense attorney takes on Carter W. case." I read the name twice. Daniel Brooks. Beneath his name were the grim details. Michael Carter, 52, CEO of Carter Energy Solutions, a mid-sized oil services company in Houston. 3 weeks earlier, on a Friday night after a long client dinner at a downtown steakhouse, Carter got behind the wheel of his Escalade. His blood alcohol level tested at 0.17, more than double the legal limit under Texas law. Traveling at 60 miles an hour, he ran a red light on Westheimer Road and broadsided a sedan driven by 34-year-old James Miller. James Miller died on impact. His 6-year-old daughter was in the back seat. She was airlifted to Texas Children's Hospital with a shattered pelvis and a collapsed lung. I set my coffee cup down and read the paragraph again. A 6-year-old girl with a crushed pelvis and a collapsed lung. Her father gone on a Friday night because a man with a 0.17 blood alcohol level decided he was fine to drive. Under Section 49.08 of the Texas Penal Code, intoxication manslaughter is a second-degree felony. That means 2 to 20 years in a state prison, heavy fines, and potentially tens of millions in civil liability. In Texas, courts take intoxication manslaughter very seriously. The likelihood of conviction was overwhelmingly high, and between the lines of the report, the evidence looked ironclad, and Daniel Brooks had just announced he was taking the case for the defense. I flipped to page 3, where the story continued. There was a professional headshot of Daniel from his firm's website, confident, showing off an expensive smile. Right beside it was a smaller photograph of Sarah Miller, 32 years old, James Miller's widow. The caption noted her daughter's name was Olivia, also 6 years old. Sarah Miller had been photographed right outside the Harris County Courthouse. She was clutching a framed photo of her late husband tight against her chest, looking directly into the camera. Her expression wasn't an act for the press. It was pure, unadulterated grief, stripped of any attempt to hide behind a brave face. Her eyes were swollen and red, her jaw set tight. She looked like a woman who had run out of tears and was now holding herself together purely by sheer force of will. I stared at that photograph for a very long time. Then I picked up my phone and dialed a man named Walter Greer, a retired investigator I had known since my early days on the bench. He was the kind of man who had spent 30 years watching the Houston legal system from the inside and knew where the metaphorical bodies were buried. "Walter," I said, "did you see the Chronicle this morning? The Carter case?" His voice came back dry. "Yeah, I saw it. Tell me what you know." A brief pause followed, the kind a man takes when deciding how much he ought to reveal. "Richard, what Daniel Brooks knows about Michael Carter and what he's about to argue in court are two very different things." "I figured as much," I said. "How different?" "Carter called Brooks straight from the crash scene," Walter said, his voice dropping even lower despite both of us being alone. 10 minutes after impact, before the paramedics even had a chance to stabilize that little girl. Whatever was said on that call, Brooks showed up before the officers even finished documenting the scene. "You draw your own conclusions." My hand gripped the receiver until my knuckles turned white. "What about the dashcam footage?" "That Escalade had a built-in recording system." "Ah, now that's where things get interesting," Walter said. "Carter's team is claiming a technical glitch, corrupted data, unrecoverable." He paused. "Convenient timing for a glitch, wouldn't you say?" I stood up from the table and walked over to the kitchen window. Outside, Houston was waking up, cars passing, sprinklers turning on, a neighbor walking a golden retriever. The city moved along its ordinary grid, completely unaware of what was taking shape in its courtrooms. $2 million in legal fees, Walter added. That's the figure floating around. Carter paid Brooks $2 million to make a 0.17 blood alcohol level and a body on Westheimer Road simply vanish. "He can't make it vanish," I said. "No, he can't," Walter agreed. "But he can make it complicated. He can stall. He can drag Sarah Miller through 18 months of agonizing depositions while her 6-year-old daughter recovers from a crushed pelvis. He can plant just enough doubt in a jury's mind, and doubt is all he needs to win." I pressed 2 fingers against my forehead as a dull ache began to build behind my eyes, not from physical pain, but from the slow burn of carefully restrained rage. "What about the girl's account?" I asked. "She was 6. Walter spoke softly. "She was in the back seat. Whatever she saw, whatever she remembers, Daniel Brooks will find a way to make it look like the unreliable, easily swayed memory of a traumatized child." Another pause. "He's exceptionally good at it, Richard. That's precisely why Carter hired him." I looked back down at the newspaper on my table, staring at the photo of Sarah Miller, her set jaw, her swollen eyes, clutching that picture frame like the absolute last solid object in a world falling apart. "Thank you, Walter," I said. "Richard." His tone shifted, growing cautious, the way an old friend sounds when they're about to say something they know you don't want to hear. Whatever you're thinking about doing, be careful. I'm always careful, I replied. You're a retired judge whose son-in-law just took on a case that's going to dominate every front page in Houston for the next year. He said, that isn't careful, that's volatile. I folded the paper and set it aside. I'll be in touch, Walter. I hung up and stood by the window for a long time, watching Margaret's peach tree. Now in May, it was full of green leaves, resilient and steady. $2 million. That was the value Daniel Brooks placed on a human life. That was the price tag to ensure the law failed to do its job. But money wasn't the only thing Daniel was hiding. The system that recorded everything on Westheimer Road that night, he already knew exactly where it was. In my 40 years on the bench, I learned a fundamental truth about guilty men with expensive lawyers. They don't hide the truth by destroying it. They bury it in procedure. They drown it in filings. They make the process so convoluted and exhausting that the people searching for justice run out of time and money long before they ever reach the truth. Daniel Brooks had learned that lesson all too well. 4 days after our initial conversation, Walter called me back. I was in the backyard, mindlessly adjusting the garden hose, the kind of brainless task you do when your mind won't stop racing and your hands need something to grip. I found out more about that recording system, he said, skipping any greeting. You're not going to like it. Give it to me straight. The dashcam in Carter's Escalade didn't just suffer a technical failure. I could hear Walter carefully measuring his words. I told you Carter called Brooks right from the scene. What I didn't mention was what an informant in my old department overheard 2 days later in the garage. Brooks and Carter's assistant were inspecting the vehicle. My grip tightened on the hose, water spilling onto my shoes. The assistant was instructed to submit the vehicle for technical review, routine procedure, completely compliant on paper. But the explicit instruction was to delay any data extraction requests from the investigation team until Brooks gave the green light. Walter paused. Under Texas law, once an attorney formally notifies investigators that he represents a client, certain evidence requests have to go directly through him. Brooks used that window. He turned standard legal representation into a stalling tactic. I stayed silent. The water had pooled into a muddy patch around my feet. I reached down and shut off the valve. Delay it long enough, and verifying anything on that system becomes an uphill battle, Walter said. Chain of custody issues, questions about timestamps. It gives a defense attorney all the room he needs to argue the data was compromised. I sat down on the steps of the back porch. The late afternoon sun hit the peach tree at a low angle, casting long shadows across the yard. Under Texas law, specifically Section 37.09 of the Penal Code, tampering with physical evidence in a criminal investigation is a third-degree felony. If the underlying investigation involves a fatality, it escalates to a second-degree felony. What Walter was describing walked right up to the line without technically stepping over it. Daniel was far too cautious to break the law outright. He simply bent the rules until they were unrecognizable, then pointed at the shape and called it straight. And there's more, Walter added. Did you see the piece in the Chronicle this morning? I hadn't. I walked inside, opened my laptop, and pulled up the news site. The headline made my stomach turn. Miller accident. Questions raised over victim's driving record. I read through it quickly, then read it a second time, much slower. I set my hands flat on the kitchen table because my fingers had started to shake. The article cited unnamed sources suggesting that James Miller, the man killed on Westheimer Road, had a history of reckless driving. It was written clever enough to avoid explicit defamation, but it was printed right there under the byline of a freelance reporter no one seemed to know. Walter, I said, keeping my voice rigidly controlled, the way I used to when suppressing emotion in a courtroom. Who submitted that story? A freelancer named Davis, Walter said. But the sources, at least 2 of them, trace right back to a private investigative firm in Greenway Plaza. Small outfit, does a lot of contract work for defense attorneys. Daniel hired someone to smear a dead man. I can't prove that in a court of law, Walter cautioned. All I can tell you is that James Miller had exactly 1 speeding ticket in 11 years of driving. Out near Katy in 2019, doing 42 and a 35. That is his entire driving record. That familiar, searing pressure built behind my eyes again. I pictured Sarah Miller reading that headline, sitting at her kitchen table somewhere in Houston with her 6-year-old daughter in a hospital bed, reading a story that blamed her dead husband for his own murder. Is the public buying it? I asked. Some are, Walter said, his voice heavy with fatigue. Online comments. People saying maybe Miller was speeding too. Maybe Carter wasn't the only careless driver. You know how this works. Once you plant the seed of doubt, it grows on its own. Daniel doesn't need to win the argument. He just needs to muddy the waters. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was peaceful. A kid was riding a bicycle down the sidewalk, completely unaware that just 30 minutes away, a family was being systematically torn apart by a man charging $2 million to do it. Walter, I said, thank you for telling me. Richard. He paused. I know that tone. I saw it on your face for 30 years in court. Whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything, I said. I'm just processing. That's what worries me, he said, and clicked off the line. I stood by the window for a long time. The peach tree, the quiet street, the afternoon sun, bathing everything in a warm glow, acting as if nothing terrible was happening underneath it all. I opened the bottom desk drawer and stared at the worn folder in the back, the one bearing my name, the Honorable Richard Dawson, Harris County District Court. I didn't touch it. Not yet. But that evening, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like a retired man sitting quietly in an empty house. I felt a storm gathering on the horizon, and I knew I had to choose where I stood. I wasn't in the house that night. I want to make that completely clear. I wasn't there, and everything I know about what happened 2 weeks before the trial was pieced together slowly, fragment by fragment, from the only witness who shared the truth without being asked. When Olivia finally talked about it, she was 7 years old. We were sitting on my back porch on a Saturday afternoon eating peach pie. She brought it up the way children talk about heavy things, not as a dramatic confession, but simply as a matter of fact, like discussing the weather. Mommy cried that night, she said. The night before Daddy stopped coming home. My chest went completely tight. Which night, sweetheart? The night she found that thing on his computer. She pressed her fork into the crust, not eating, just pressing. She was using Daddy's laptop because hers was charging, and she needed to print something for school. Then she got really quiet. Then she started crying. And then Daddy came home. She stopped there. I sat motionless, holding my coffee cup. He was very loud, she said softly. Daddy was really loud that night. That is how I learned the truth, not because I was there, but because a 7-year-old girl sat on my porch, using the careful, measured words children use when describing something frightening they witnessed before they had the language to understand it. What Emily found on that laptop was an email thread. Daniel's account was left open, the careless mistake of a man who had been cautious for so long he no longer believed he could be caught. The emails were between Daniel and the private investigator in Greenway Plaza. The instructions were explicit. Make the victim look responsible. Dig up anything, driving record, finances, personal history. I don't care how you frame it. Below that, the investigator's reply, record is spotless. Just a single minor speeding ticket. And beneath that, Daniel's response. Then we create the narrative. People believe what they read. Make it convincing. Emily printed the entire thread. According to Olivia, her mother was sitting at the kitchen table holding those pages when Daniel walked in. She asked him what it was. Olivia said, setting her fork down. Her little face twisted into an expression far too mature for her age, the look of a child carrying a weight way too heavy for her shoulders. She said, Daniel, what is this? She was already crying. Her voice was shaking. I forced myself to inhale slowly through my nose and exhale through my mouth. What did your father say? I asked, keeping my voice as steady as humanly possible. He got really mad. Olivia picked up her fork again, then laid it down. He said she had no right going through his things. He said she didn't understand how the law worked. He said she hesitated, searching her memory. She didn't give me every single word, but she gave me the outline, the mental scars carved deep into a child's mind. He said something about how Mommy was nothing without him, Olivia said slowly. And then Mommy said she found out what he did to that man's family, and Daddy said that family wasn't our problem. She paused. Then he said something about protecting our family. His voice got really quiet. That was the part that scared me. It's okay, sweetheart, I said gently. You don't have to keep going if you don't want to. He struck her, Olivia said plainly. Matter of fact, like a child who had replayed the moment in her head so many times the edges had worn smooth. He hit Mommy, and I was sitting on the stairs. I saw it. I carefully set my coffee cup down on the porch railing because my hands were trembling so badly I couldn't trust them. 7 years old, sitting on the stairs, watching her father strike her mother. That image settled in my chest like a sharp, heavy stone, the kind that lands and never moves again. Olivia, I said, my voice coming out far raspier than I intended. I cleared my throat. After that night, was your mother okay? She didn't cry anymore, Olivia said, at least not where I could see her. But in the morning, her eyes were really puffy. She held me for a long time before school. She looked up at me with clear, serious eyes that resembled Emily's at that age so much it made my heart ache. Grandpa, is Daddy a bad man? I looked at my granddaughter for a long moment, taking in the cooling pie between us and the long shadows cast by the peach tree across the porch floor. Your father made some very terrible choices, I said, measuring every word. That's different from simply being a bad man. But when those choices hurt the people you love, the distinction doesn't matter much anymore. She processed that with the deep solemnity children bring to adult answers. Then she picked up her fork and went back to her pie. I looked out over the yard. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a profound, cold calm deep inside. It wasn't a calm born of peace, but of absolute certainty, the feeling of seeing a situation clearly and refusing to step back ever again. Emily called me early the next morning. Her voice sounded fragile and careful, as if she were holding it in both hands to keep it from shattering. Dad, she said, I miss you. She didn't tell me what happened the night before. She didn't need to. I found out later that she sat with those printed pages for 2 weeks, too terrified to go to the police because she had no money of her own, too afraid to consult a lawyer because she couldn't afford one, terrified that moving too fast would cost her Olivia. That kind of fear doesn't make a person passive. It makes them exceptionally cautious. She was waiting for the right door to open. And when Linda Foster called after seeing the trial coverage, that door finally swung wide. Something in that phrase, Dad, I miss you. The way she said the word Dad, as if it were the first solid piece of ground she had found in years, told me everything between the lines. She didn't detail the events, but the tone in her voice made it clear that the walls Daniel had built around her were finally cracking, and whatever came next, she was going to be the one to step through them. Before we keep going, if this story is touching your heart, please drop a number 9 in the comments. I just need to know you're still here with me and following along. Every single fatherly instinct in my body screamed at me, get in the car, drive to her right now. I know how it sounds. I know any father hearing those words spoken in a voice as fragile as glass would rush out the door before even hanging up the phone. I wanted to do exactly that. Every bone in my body pulled me toward the driveway, but 40 years on the bench had taught me a much harder lesson. Wanting to take action and knowing when to take action are two completely different things. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is staying right where you are. After hanging up with Emily, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The morning light filtered through the window at a sharp angle, catching the dust motes in the air and making time feel like it was moving in slow motion. I brewed another pot of coffee, but left it untouched. I stared at the brown notebook on the table, but didn't open it. I thought about what would happen if I drove over to that house right now. Daniel would see my car in the driveway. He would open the door, his face shifting into that cold, indifferent mask, and he would deliver a smooth, final rejection. Emily would be standing somewhere behind him, and I would watch the cold calculation take place in her eyes. If I let Dad in, I lose Olivia. And then she would close the door politely, apologetically, because that is what 5 years of systematic isolation does to a person from the inside out. You don't just run out the door simply because someone you love shows up. You've been conditioned to believe that the person at the door is the real danger. So I stayed put. I picked up the phone, but I didn't call Emily. I called Arthur Hendricks, the family law attorney I had consulted months ago about Emily's hypothetical situation. "Arthur," I said, "I need to revisit our last conversation." "I figured I'd hear from you eventually," he said. "Has the situation changed?" She reached out. I kept my voice steady. She didn't say it outright, but she's extending a hand. "That's major," Arthur said. "Richard, I'm going to be straight with you. A woman in her position, no financial independence, a husband using custody as a weapon, the moment she begins to show cracks is also the moment she's most vulnerable. If she moves before securing proper backing, he will turn it against her in a heartbeat." "I know," I said. "That's precisely why I'm calling you instead of getting in my car." "Smart," he said. "Here's what I can do. I'll draft a comprehensive protection strategy. Financial discovery motions, emergency custody petitions, protective order filings if necessary. Everything lined up and ready to go. The moment she gives the word, the second she decides to move, we execute within 24 hours. Do it," I said. "Whatever it costs, Richard." A brief pause followed. "The final decision still has to come from her. You know that, right?" "I know," I said. "I just need to ensure that when she makes the call, the door opens wide immediately." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. My coffee had gone completely cold. Outside, a mockingbird perched on the peach tree, doing what it did best, mimicking 5 or 6 other birds without ever making its own sound. 40 minutes later, my phone rang again. It came from a number I didn't recognize at first, but then it clicked. The Harris County Court Administration. "Richard." The voice was warm, instantly familiar, even after 3 years. Carol Simmons, the senior clerk for the Harris County District Courts. The woman who had managed my dockets, organized my case files, and kept my courtroom running with tireless efficiency for decades. She had been there so long she practically seemed built into the architecture of the building itself. "I don't know if you've been tracking the assignment for the Carter case," she said. "I've been following it closely," I replied cautiously. "Then you might already know what I'm about to tell you." A beat of silence followed. In that pause, I heard something I didn't expect. It wasn't hesitation. It was restraint. It sounded like she was trying exceptionally hard to keep her voice professional, fighting to maintain her composure. "The case has been assigned, Richard. It was assigned to you." Outside, the mockingbird sang 3 more borrowed songs. The chief judge invoked the senior judge recall provision. Carol continued. Section 74.06, of the Texas Government Code. When standard dockets get overwhelmed, the court can temporarily recall retired judges for specific assignments. Somebody put your name forward. He signed the recall order this morning. "Carol," I said, my voice steady, "does Daniel Brooks know who's been assigned?" "The assignment order posted to the court docket 30 minutes ago," she replied. "It's public record. So he might not know yet, but he will soon." I stood up from the kitchen table and walked over to the window, watching the peach tree and the bird still practicing its borrowed tunes. "Carol," I said softly, "is my robe still at the courthouse?" There was a brief silence, and then I heard something shift in her tone, a profound sense of relief, as if she had been waiting a very long time to let go of a breath she'd been holding. "I've kept it pressed clean," she said. "Every month. I don't know why, I just felt like I should." My throat tightened. 3 years. For 3 years, she had pressed that robe every single month. "I'll be there Thursday morning," I told her. "I'll have courtroom 4 ready," she said, her voice dropping lower. "It's good to have you back, Richard." I set the phone down on the kitchen table and looked toward the spare bedroom. At the bottom drawer, where that worn folder rested, the one marked, "The Honorable Richard Dawson, Harris County District Court." Then I checked the time and did the math. Daniel Brooks would see that assignment list within the hour. He had absolutely no idea what was waiting for him just down the road. I hadn't walked through those courthouse doors as a judge in 3 years. The building looked identical. The granite facade, the wide stone steps, the Texas flag fluttering in the October breeze above the entrance. Everything was exactly where I left it. The only thing that had changed was me. Or perhaps I had finally stopped pretending to be smaller than I actually was. On Thursday morning, 2 days before the trial was set to begin, I arrived at 7:15 a.m. to beat the morning rush. I entered through the side doors, a private access point leading straight to the judicial wing, a hallway defendants, lawyers, and the general public never see. My old security badge swiped successfully at the reader. More than anything else, that brought a quiet wave of relief to my chest. Carol was waiting for me in the hallway outside my old chambers. She was 61 now, her hair dusted with silver, wearing the same dark blazer style she had worn for every major occasion I could remember over 20 years. Sentencing hearings, retirement ceremonies, and the dark day we lost a young court clerk in a car accident, a loss that left the entire floor silent for a week. She looked at me the way people look at something they've anticipated for a long time, where the actual arrival feels almost serene. "You look good," she said. "You look older," I replied softly. "You look like a judge," she said, which was something entirely different. She turned and unlocked the office door. "Come in, I have something to show you." The room smelled exactly the same. Old paper, wood polish, and the faint metallic tang of the air conditioning. It was that distinct scent unique to rooms where serious things happen, preserved by decades of habit. My old desk was there, and the bookshelves still held the case reporters I had personally placed on the shelves. The window looked out over the courthouse parking garage, a view I had stared at for 20 years while pondering verdicts. Hanging on the coat rack in the corner was something that looked as though I had left it there just yesterday. My judicial robe. I walked across the room and touched the fabric. Smooth, freshly pressed, the pleats sharp and clean. After sitting in a courthouse closet for 3 years, it looked better than most suits I had worn recently. Every month, Carol said from the doorway. First Monday of the month, I'd take it out, inspect it, iron it if it needed it, and hang it back up. She paused. "Don't ask me why, I just knew you'd need it again." My jaw set firmly against a wave of emotion trying to break through. I took a slow, deep breath. "Thank you, Carol," I said, my voice coming out much steadier than I felt. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You still have to clear the ethics committee first." At 9:00 a.m., we met with the Harris County Judicial Ethics Committee, 3 senior judges, an administrative counsel, and a court reporter to make it official. I walked in, sat down, and laid everything on the table before anyone could ask a single question. "I need to disclose a conflict of interest," I stated. "The defense attorney in the Carter case, Daniel Brooks, is married to my daughter. I have had no substantive contact with either party in nearly 2 years. I hold zero financial interest in the outcome of this case. The conflict is purely personal and relational, not financial or legal." Judge Patricia Harmon, the senior member of the panel, leaned forward over her reading glasses. "Most judges in your position would recuse themselves automatically, Richard." "Most judges in my position," I said carefully, "haven't spent 3 years observing how Daniel Brooks operates. I am not recusing myself, because recusal is precisely what he would want. And when the conflict is this attenuated, under Rule 3B of the Texas Code of Judicial Conduct, mandatory recusal is not required. The code specifies that a judge must disqualify himself when a personal bias or financial interest exists. A son-in-law serving as opposing counsel without financial entanglements or direct personal contact between the parties falls into a gray area. The rules resolve that by requiring full disclosure rather than automatic recusal. I knew the rule intimately. I had cited it dozens of times from the bench. "You will have to make a full disclosure on the record at the start of proceedings," said Judge Marcus Webb, the youngest panel member. "Give both sides a clear opportunity to object on the record." "Agreed," I said. "If either party objects, I will recuse myself immediately. No argument, no appeals." They deliberated behind closed doors for 20 minutes. Carol and I waited in the hallway, where she brought me a cup of coffee that I actually drank. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "No," I said, then corrected myself. "Yes, but not because of the committee. I'm nervous for Emily, for what she's going to see when she walks into that courtroom. She doesn't know. She's going to find out at the exact same moment Daniel does." Carol looked at me for a long moment. "She'll be all right, Richard. I know," I said. "I just need to make it through the next 48 hours." The committee reconvened and approved the disclosure with the conditions set. I signed the paperwork, shook 3 hands, and walked back to my chambers with Carol. She helped me into my robe, smoothing the shoulders and adjusting the collar, just as she had done 1,000 times before. I stood in front of the small mirror on the office wall and looked at myself. 70 years old, full head of white hair, wrinkles on my face that weren't there the last time I wore this garment. But underneath it all were the exact same eyes, the eyes that had looked down at 2,000 cases from that bench, always trying to see through the noise to find the truth. "Same robe," I said. "Same man. Different battle," Carol added softly. I turned away from the mirror. Daniel Brooks had spent 6 years deciding who he thought I was. In 48 hours, he was going to realize how utterly wrong he had been, just like he was wrong about everything else. I arrived at the courthouse at 6:45 a.m. that morning. Force of habit. For 20 years, I had arrived at the Harris County Courthouse at that exact hour, always wanting that first quiet hour before the building filled with people and the day's work began pulling in every direction. But this morning, I didn't use the judicial entrance. Not yet. I had chosen my clothes with deliberate care the night before. An old beige coat with a left cuff that was slightly frayed, one I had meant to replace for 2 years, gray trousers that had lost their sharp crease around 2021, and clean, unpolished shoes. The entire ensemble communicated the exact message I needed it to: a retired, unremarkable man whom nobody needed to pay attention to. I wanted Daniel to see this version of me one final time. I wanted him to feel that familiar contempt settle comfortably in his chest, as if it belonged there. I wanted him relaxed, comfortable, stepping into that courtroom with the specific confidence of a man who believed he already knew how the day was going to end. I bought a cup of coffee from a cart outside, black, no sugar, the way I'd taken it since law school. I found a spot near the main steps as the morning crowd flowed around me like water past a stone. The October sun was just clearing the buildings to the east, casting long golden light across the granite steps and the Texas flag fluttering overhead. I was taking my second sip when the Lincoln Town car pulled up to the curb. Daniel got out first, charcoal suit, an expensive cut that held its shape no matter how he moved, burgundy tie. Shoes catching the morning sun, revealing a recent professional shine. Right behind him were 2 associates, both young, both carrying the tense expressions of people working for a man who doesn't tolerate mistakes. He saw me almost immediately. I watched the expression cross his face, a quick recalibration, the tiny shift in features when a man notices something beneath his notice. His chin lifted slightly, his pace unhurried as he shifted direction and walked straight toward me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not even bothering to lower his voice. The 2 associates fanned out slightly behind him, and I noticed other people on the steps taking in the scene. 3 attorneys talking by the door, a court reporter walking down with a stack of files, 2 journalists holding notebooks by the glass doors. Everyone was well within earshot. "Having my morning coffee," I said, gently holding up the paper cup. "Does Emily know you're here?" he asked, using the tone he'd use for a hassle she'd forgotten to clear away. "Because if she sent you—" "Emily doesn't know I'm here," I said calmly. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture left in a doorway. Then something shifted, a decision to perform, to make a statement on the steps for the benefit of his audience. He turned his shoulders slightly and brushed hard against mine, sharp and deliberate. The coffee flew first. The hot liquid arched through the crisp October air, splashing across my coat and spreading into a dark, ugly stain. The paper cup hit the granite and split open. "Whoops! Watch it, old man." His voice carried easily. "This isn't a park bench. Some of us actually have business here today." Someone on the steps let out a laugh, short, uncertain, the sound of a person not quite sure if they ought to be laughing. Daniel looked down at the dark stain spreading across my coat. An expression crossed his eyes that wasn't quite remorse and wasn't quite satisfaction, something uglier between the two. "Sorry about that," he said, his tone conveying the exact opposite. "Maybe next time don't stand right in the middle of a courthouse entrance looking lost." He glanced back at one of his associates. Someone get him a napkin or something. Neither associate moved. Daniel adjusted his cuffs and looked me over one last time, taking in the beige coat, the gray trousers, the coffee stain expanding into the fabric, with the total contempt of a man evaluating someone he considered beneath him forever. "You know what your problem is, Richard?" he said, using my first name as always, like delivering a final verdict. "You've spent your whole life standing in rooms you don't belong in, thinking just showing up makes you important." He adjusted his lapels. "Go home. Today isn't the day for your little show." He turned and walked up the steps with his associates, already talking about depositions, scheduling, and the case that was going to make his career. Surrounding conversations resumed, journalists returned to their notebooks, and attorneys pushed through the glass doors. I stood on those steps with coffee, soaking through my coat, watching Daniel Brooks's back disappear into the building. In roughly 90 minutes, I would be looking down at him from 10 feet above the floor. I carefully set the cracked paper cup on the edge of a nearby concrete planter. "Hope you're still laughing in 10 minutes, son," I said quietly, just loud enough for myself to hear. He didn't turn around. As the heavy doors shut behind him, his laughter sounded just a little bit louder. I waited until the steps had cleared. Then I walked to the left, past the main entrance and the media area, to the unmarked side door that connects to the judicial wing. The door defendants, lawyers, and the public pass every day without ever realizing it exists. My badge touched the card reader, and the lock clicked open. 10 minutes later, Daniel Brooks walked into courtroom 4, and I was already sitting there waiting for him. A courtroom holds a very specific kind of silence right before proceedings begin. It isn't an empty silence. It's the silence of a room holding its breath. 50 people gathered in one space, all waiting for the same moment, creating a low hum of collective tension beneath the threshold of hearing. I had sat in that silence from both sides of the bench over the years. That morning, for the first time in 3 years, I was sitting on the right side of it. Carol kept everything running with absolute precision. The counsel tables were set, and the court reporter was in position. The gallery was steadily filling with the usual crowd a high-profile case attracts. Journalists with notebooks, law students with eager expressions expecting an educational show. And sitting in the very first row of the public gallery, wearing a dark blue blouse with her hands carefully folded in her lap, was Sarah Miller. 32 years old, James Miller's widow. She had arrived earlier than anyone else. Carol told me later she was 40 minutes early, sitting in the hallway until the doors unlocked. When she walked in, she slipped a small framed photograph into her purse. I watched Sarah Miller from my vantage point near the office door for a moment, taking in the posture of her shoulders and the careful stillness she maintained, the stillness of a person who had decided long before walking in how much energy she was willing to expend today. Then I pushed open the door and stepped toward the bench. The sound that swept through the room wasn't noise. It was the sudden absence of it. The murmur of 50 people, the rustle of papers, the low ambient hum of a room in motion, all of it cut off simultaneously, as if a needle had been lifted from a spinning record. Carol's voice rang out clear and crisp, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Richard Dawson presiding. The scrape of chairs echoed as everyone stood. Daniel was at the defense table on the left, 6 feet from the bench. He had a legal pad in front of him and a pen in hand, leaning over to whisper something to the young man beside him, his associate in the gold-rimmed glasses and dark navy suit I had seen outside on the steps. He exuded an easy, unhurried posture, clearly expecting the coming hours to go entirely according to his script. The associate looked up first. I watched the color drain from his face in real time. It didn't fade gradually. It vanished instantly, as if something had pulled the blood right out of his skin. He reached out blindly and grabbed Daniel's arm. Daniel kept talking, waving him off with 2 fingers, the motion of a man accustomed to brushing away minor interruptions. The associate grabbed his sleeve harder. Daniel's pen stopped mid-word, his jaw tightening with annoyance at having his train of thought broken. He turned to glance at the associate, caught the look of absolute terror on the young man's face, and then slowly lifted his gaze toward the bench, toward my robe, toward the nameplate resting in front of me. The Honorable Richard Dawson. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. The pen slipped from his fingers, hitting the table with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the dead, silent room. His chair scraped backward violently, not tilted or bumped, but shoved back hard by a man whose legs reacted before his brain could process what he was seeing. His legal pad slid off the edge of the table, and loose papers followed, deposition extracts, exhibit lists, the meticulously organized architecture of 6 months of case preparation, cascading slowly onto the courtroom floor. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, devoid of sound, like a door popping open when the latch fails. I didn't move. My hands remained folded calmly on the bench, my back straight. My face held the exact expression I had worn for 20 years, when I needed everyone in the room to understand that what was happening was definitely not a show. Mr. Brooks. My voice was flat, clear, and carried effortlessly to the back wall, the voice of a man who had spent 2 decades ensuring he was heard in this exact room. Before we proceed, the court has a disclosure to make for the record. I could feel the entire gallery leaning forward. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine. Counsel for the defense, Mr. Daniel Brooks, is married to my daughter. Prior to today's proceedings, this relationship was fully disclosed to the Harris County Judicial Ethics Committee. The committee reviewed the matter and authorized this court to proceed, provided both parties are informed on the record and given an explicit opportunity to object. I looked directly down at Daniel. He hadn't moved a muscle since standing up. His hands hung limp at his sides, and even from 10 feet away, I could see they weren't entirely steady. Does the defense wish to enter an objection to this court's jurisdiction? Every single head in that courtroom turned to look at Daniel Brooks. I watched him calculate, watching the options flash through his eyes, the same eyes that 40 minutes ago had looked at my beige coat on the courthouse steps with total, comfortable contempt. If he objected, he would have to explain why on the record. He would have to stand in front of those journalists in the gallery and describe exactly what happened on those steps. The deliberate shoulder check, the spilled coffee, the words, "Watch it, old man." Every bit of it recorded for posterity in a room full of people holding pens. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His hands found the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the wood. He shook his head, just once, a short, sharp motion, cutting off his options before he could second-guess himself. I reached for my gavel. The polished wood felt smooth and familiar in my hand. Same gavel, same bench, same courtroom. I had issued 2,000 rulings from this seat, and I had never once forgotten why I sat here. The gavel came down, followed by 2 words, as quiet as a final judgment, and just as absolute. Be seated. When Daniel sank back into his chair, he was bracing for retaliation. I could tell by the way he held his body after those 2 words fell. The tension in his shoulders, his jaw clamped tight like a man preparing for impact. His eyes kept darting between me and the side exit, as if measuring an escape route. He was expecting a vindictive judge, rulings stacked against him before arguments even began, a courtroom transformed into a closing trap. Instead, he received the one thing he was least equipped to handle: absolute fairness. "Plaintiff's counsel," I said, turning my gaze to the prosecution table. "You may proceed with your opening statement." Linda Foster stood up from her table, a woman in her late 90s, wearing a dark tailored suit, possessing the quiet composure that comes from 15 years of courtroom experience, where composure is the only currency that matters. She was one of the finest trial attorneys in Harris County, representing Sarah Miller, and her case files reflected the sheer weight of her preparation. She delivered her opening statement in 11 clean minutes, precise, clear, completely devoid of theatrics. She laid out the facts of that Friday night on Westheimer Road: the blood alcohol level, the speed, the red light, the collision. The death of 34-year-old James Miller. His 6-year-old daughter, airlifted to Texas Children's Hospital with a shattered pelvis. She added no personal editorial, no tears. When the facts are that brutal, you simply let them speak for themselves. Then Daniel stood up. He adjusted his jacket, rolling his neck slightly, the physical reset of an athlete stepping onto the field. He delivered an opening statement that, from a strictly professional standpoint, I had to admit was technically brilliant. He constructed his defense around reasonable doubt, conflicting forensic timelines, and the inherent unreliability of field sobriety tests under specific conditions. He cited 3 Texas Court of Criminal Appeals precedents without looking at a single note, reciting the citations from memory. He was sharp. I had never doubted his intellect. 40 minutes into the trial, Linda Foster asked a line of questions that began pushing her witness into territory Daniel preferred to avoid. Objection. Daniel was on his feet before Linda could even finish her sentence. Leading the witness, Your Honor. I evaluated the question against the rules. He was correct. Sustained, I ruled. A tiny pause followed, and Daniel's chin lifted just a fraction of an inch, barely perceptible, but enough to notice. He sat back down. 20 minutes later, Linda Foster attempted to introduce testimony through a witness who hadn't been properly designated as an expert under Rule 702 of the Texas Rules of Evidence. Objection, Daniel stated firmly. Under Rule 702, the witness lacks the requisite qualifications to offer this opinion. I reviewed the witness designation in the case file. Daniel was right again. Sustained, I said. Counsel will need to lay proper foundation regarding expert qualifications before this line of inquiry can proceed. This time, Daniel didn't sit down immediately. He remained standing half a second longer than necessary, just long enough for his associate to see, just long enough to register as a subtle signal of confidence. By the noon recess, I had sustained 4 of Daniel's objections and overruled 2, a completely standard morning for a contested civil trial. Nothing unusual, nothing that would warrant a second glance from an appellate court. But Daniel didn't see standard. Daniel saw what he desperately wanted to see. During the break, I watched him in the hallway through the glass panel beside my office door. He was talking to his associate, his body language revealing the tension leaving his frame. His shoulders relaxed, his set jaw softened, and the cautious posture from the morning melted into something far more familiar and comfortable, looking much more like the Daniel Brooks who had stood on the courthouse steps that morning telling an old man to go home. I caught fragments of his conversation through the glass. Right down the middle, evidence is leaning our way. And then, with the distinct confidence of a man who believed the outcome was settled long before the verdict, exactly where I want him. His associate murmured something I couldn't make out. Daniel shook his head and smiled, his real smile, the one I had seen at that first Thanksgiving dinner 6 years ago, the one that never quite reached his eyes. I turned away from the glass. On the desk behind me lay the case file, 40 pages of motions, deposition transcripts, forensic reports, and witness lists. I had read it 3 times over the past week. I knew every argument Daniel was going to make, and exactly where each one would lead him. I picked up my pen and made a tiny mark in the margin of page 37. The afternoon session unfolded much like the morning. Daniel's objections were sharp, well-timed, and mostly accurate under the law. I ruled strictly according to the rules of evidence. By 4:00 p.m., when I adjourned the court for the day, Daniel Brooks walked out of that room with the stride of a man convinced he had already won the war. Sarah Samiller walked out behind him. Her attorney placed a hand gently on her arm, whispering something in her ear, and Sarah offered a brief, tight nod. Her lips were pressed pale and thin, holding the posture of someone whose only alternative was breaking down in public. As she passed the bench, she looked up, her eyes locking onto mine for a fraction of a second. I gave her nothing, no comfort, no apology, no hint of what I knew that she didn't yet. A judge's face is a mirror, not a window. I had learned that in my first year on the bench and never forgot it. But I held her gaze for one full second longer than necessary. He thought my fairness was weakness. He had made that mistake before, with me, with Emily, with everyone he underestimated. I wasn't about to correct him just yet. The second day of a trial is usually when a case quietly breaks, not in a grand burst of drama, but in the dry procedural mechanics that most people don't notice until the outcome is already locked in. Daniel knew this. He walked into courtroom, 4 on day 2 brimming with energy, looking like a man who had slept remarkably well, which told me everything I needed to know about his mindset. I hadn't slept at all. I had sat at my kitchen table until 2:00 a.m., going over Linda Foster's exhibit list line by line. Not because I doubted her case, but because I needed to know with absolute certainty what was coming before it arrived. Around midnight, on page 14 of her exhibit index, I found it. Exhibit 11C, a series of toxicology and accident reconstruction reports compiled by the Houston Police Department within 72 hours of the crash. Crucial evidence. Presented correctly, it told the story of that night on Westheimer Road, with timestamp precision. However, there was an issue with the certification attached to 11C. Under Rule 901 of the Texas Rules of Evidence, the chain of custody form, the document tracking every person who handled the evidence from collection to court, was missing a required signature. The HPD evidence technician who transferred the files to the district attorney's office had initialed the form, but failed to sign his full name on the official verification line. A minor oversight, the sort of thing that happens at 11:00 p.m. when someone is exhausted and assumes initials are sufficient. Except they aren't. Under Rule 901, authenticating documentary evidence requires a complete, unbroken chain. A missing certification signature breaks that chain, rendering the evidence inadmissible. I stared at that missing signature for a very long time before closing the file and going to bed, lying in the dark thinking about James Miller and the terrible cost of a man running a red light at 60 miles an hour. Morning arrived, and the courtroom filled to capacity. Linda Foster called her morning witnesses with quiet confidence, the poise of an attorney who believed her evidence was rock solid. She was precise and in total control, guiding each witness exactly where she needed them to go. The gallery was quieter today, more focused, as the gravity of what was at stake settled over the room. At 10:45 a.m., she moved to admit Exhibit 11C. Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 11C, the HPD Toxicology and Accident Reconstruction Report, into evidence. Before she could even finish the sentence, Daniel was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Chain of custody. Exhibit 11C lacks the required certification signature on the transfer log. Under Rule 901, the chain is broken. Every head in the room turned toward the bench. I opened the exhibit, examined the certification record, and looked at the initials where a full signature should have been. The technician had written DR in the box. But initials do not constitute a full legal signature under Rule 901, a distinction the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has upheld in no fewer than 7 published opinions since 1998. In that moment, my job was not to hope or feel. My job was to apply the law. Sustained, I ruled clearly. Exhibit 11C is excluded pending proper certification cure. Plaintiff's counsel, you have 24 hours to remedy the defect. The sound that rippled through the gallery wasn't loud, just a sharp, collective gasp as 50 people recalibrated simultaneously. Linda Foster's composure held, but barely. A muscle twitched in her jaw as she gave a single tight nod. Understood, Your Honor. I let my eyes shift briefly toward the plaintiff's side of the gallery. Sarah Miller's hands were pressed flat against her thighs, her knuckles pale. Her attorney leaned over to speak to her, but Sarah just offered a tiny, rigid shake of her head, staring straight ahead, a woman enduring a blow while refusing to show how deeply it cut. My chest tightened in a way I couldn't allow to show on my face. Across the room, Daniel sat back down. He didn't celebrate outright. He was far too cautious for that. But his posture shifted completely. The careful tension from yesterday morning was gone, replaced by an easy, settled demeanor. It was the posture of a man who had watched the scales tilt in his direction and was now comfortably waiting for the final result. He whispered something to his associate, who jotted it down immediately. During the afternoon recess, I was in my chambers when Carol knocked and stepped inside. "The hallway," she said simply. I stood near the door and listened. Daniel's voice carried clearly from the corridor outside. "The evidence issue changes the timeline. If 11C can't be presented in sequence to the jury, their entire narrative collapses. We push hard tomorrow morning, and by afternoon, a brief pause." "Tell me I'm wrong." His associate's voice came back softer. "You're not wrong, Daniel." Then Daniel spoke again, brimming with the absolute certainty of a man who believed he had written the ending. "He's playing it straight by the book. The old man is playing it completely straight." I worried for nothing. I closed my office door, sat at my desk, and picked up my pen before setting it back down. In 24 hours, Linda Foster would remedy the certification defect, and Exhibit 11C would be properly admitted into evidence, a routine procedural fix, even under time pressure. But that wasn't what was going to matter in 24 hours. I looked down at my phone. An unread message had arrived at 2:17 p.m. from an unknown number. I had already read it twice. "Judge Dawson, I need to speak with you through official channels regarding a surprise witness. Please have your clerk contact me. L. Foster." I set the phone face down on the desk. When Daniel left the courthouse that evening, he went home believing the next morning belonged to him. He had absolutely no idea who was preparing to walk through those courthouse doors. She didn't call me before coming. She didn't ask for my permission, my blessing, or my advice. She simply showed up just as she had when she was 7 years old, deciding that when her mind was made up, there was no need for preliminary discussion. I found out at the exact same moment Daniel did, when Linda Foster stood up at 9:02 a.m. on the third day of trial. "Your Honor, the plaintiff moves to add a supplemental witness to the record." The motion and supporting documentation had been filed with the clerk at 7:48 a.m. that morning. Under Rule 193.6 of the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure, a party may introduce a witness after the discovery deadline if they can demonstrate good cause and show the witness possesses critical information that could not have been reasonably anticipated. Linda had filed before the building fully opened, attaching an affidavit detailing precisely why this witness met every legal requirement. Before Linda could even finish her sentence, Daniel was on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness disclosure deadline passed 2 weeks ago. This is a last-minute procedural ambush designed to—" "Mr. Brooks," my voice cut through calmly, "I have reviewed the motion and the supporting affidavit. The witness in question possesses direct, first-hand knowledge of conduct central to this case, knowledge that plaintiff's counsel could not have acquired through standard discovery channels. The motion is granted." Daniel's jaw set tightly. "Your Honor, the defense hasn't had adequate time to prepare. You will have a full opportunity for cross-examination," I said firmly. "Plaintiff's counsel, call your witness." Linda Foster turned toward the heavy courtroom doors, her voice exceptionally smooth and composed. "The plaintiff calls Emily Brooks." Reached for the underside of my desk, where no one could see, and pressed both hands flat against my thighs, taking a slow, deep breath, just as I had learned to do years ago, stabilizing myself whenever a moment struck too hard and fast for a judge's composure to absorb completely. She was dressed in a gray blouse and dark trousers. Simple, neat, completely unpretentious. Her dark hair was pinned neatly back. She walked with a measured, resolute stride, the stride of a woman who had weighed the cost of a choice, knew it would hurt, and decided to pay it anyway. She didn't look at Daniel. She didn't look at me. Her eyes remained locked onto Linda Foster as she made her way to the witness stand, acting as though Linda were the only person in the entire room. I forced myself to look down at Daniel. The blood had drained entirely from his face, not gradually, but all at once, as if drawn straight out of his skin. His lips formed a tight, pale line. The legal pad in front of him was covered in 2 days of meticulously organized notes, and I watched his hand reach toward it, freeze, and hover an inch above the surface without touching a thing. His associate leaned over to whisper something urgently into his ear, but Daniel didn't react. He simply stared, transfixed, at his wife. Emily settled into the witness chair, keeping her back straight and resting her hands in her lap. From 10 feet above, I could see her fingers tightly intertwined, one thumb pressing hard into her palm, a small, invisible anchor for a woman far more terrified than her posture revealed. Yet when Linda Foster began her questioning, Linda's voice was solid as bedrock. "Ms. Brooks, can you describe your relationship to the defendant in this case?" "Daniel Brooks is my husband," Emily said. Then, after a pause that carried the crushing weight of 6 long years, she added, "We are currently separated." A ripple passed through the gallery. Someone in the back row shifted audibly. "Ms. Brooks, approximately 2 weeks prior to the start of this trial, did you discover something on your husband's personal laptop?" "Yes." Emily lifted her chin slightly. "I was using his laptop to print out some school documents. I work as a substitute teacher. I noticed an open email thread on the screen. Can you describe the contents of that thread?" "It was an exchange between my husband and a private investigator," Emily said, her voice unwavering even as her fingers pressed tighter together. "The instructions were to uncover negative information about James Miller, the man killed in the crash. When the investigator replied that Mr. Miller's record was completely clean, my husband responded." She paused, taking a long, steady breath. "He said, and I quote from memory, 'Then we create the narrative. People believe what they read. Make it convincing.'" The gallery went dead silent. I glanced down at Sarah Miller in the front row. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, her lips pressed into a line so tight it turned white. Her eyes were locked onto Emily in a look suspended between shock and something far deeper, the expression of a woman hearing, in public and on the official record, that the smear campaign blaming her deceased husband was deliberate, calculated, and bought and paid for. "Nothing further," Linda said, and took her seat. Daniel stood up. I watched him approach the podium. I watched him adjust his legal pad, taking a step across 12 feet of courtroom floor to face his wife. And then I saw an expression cross his face that I hadn't anticipated. Not anger, not strategic calculation, but something much closer to sheer disbelief. The unvarnished, naked shock of a man who spent 6 years deciding who Emily Brooks was, only to discover in the most public setting imaginable how utterly wrong he had been. He opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. Daniel was standing there to cross-examine his own wife. I knew that somewhere in his briefcase lay the very questions he believed could dismantle her. But what he didn't realize was what she was holding when she walked through those doors. Daniel cross-examined Emily for 38 agonizing minutes. He was methodical, I had to give him that. He attacked her from 3 distinct angles: her credibility as a witness, her motivation for testifying, and the precise circumstances under which she saw the email. He remained precise and restrained, never once raising his voice, which in a courtroom is often far more lethal than shouting. "Isn't it true," he said, leaning slightly over the podium, "that you and I are currently involved in separation proceedings, and that you have a direct personal interest in damaging my professional reputation?" Emily looked at him with complete calm. "I have a personal interest in telling the truth. Those are not the same thing. You claim you saw this email 2 weeks ago. Did you preserve any record of it at that time?" "I printed the email," Emily replied. "I still have the physical copy. You didn't hand it over to the police. You didn't give it to your attorney. You handed it directly to opposing counsel in a trial where your estranged husband is lead defense counsel." "I gave it to the person who could actually use it," Emily said. A muscle twitched in Daniel's jaw, a brief, sharp tension he quickly reined in. "Ms. Brooks, isn't it entirely possible that what you saw on that screen was a draft? A strategy memo? Hypothetical trial strategy that any defense attorney might use when evaluating a case?" Emily's eyes never left his face. He said, "Make it convincing." That wasn't a hypothesis. That was an instruction. The gallery stirred once more. That low, collective shifting of people following a thread and realizing they couldn't look away. Daniel spent another 20 minutes trying various iterations of the same line of questioning. Emily answered every single one with flat, unvarnished precision. The answers of a woman who hadn't rehearsed a script, but simply knew what she knew. By the time he muttered, "Nothing further," and sat back down, the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally shifted. A subtle, permanent tilt, like a table with a short leg finally settling into an unyielding angle. Linda Foster stood up for redirect. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "when you came to testify today, did you bring anything else with you?" Emily reached down into the bag beside her feet. Her hands were steady, remarkably steady, considering what she was doing, and the man sitting 12 feet away watching her do it. She placed a small object onto the edge of the witness stand, a USB flash drive. Standard size, black casing, completely unlabeled. "This is a duplicate copy of the dashcam footage from Michael Carter's vehicle on the night of the crash on Westheimer Road," Emily said. "It was provided to me by a woman named Diane Weber. Ms. Weber holds a written service authorization, signed by Mr. Carter, contracting her to clean and maintain his personal vehicles. That authorization granted her regular, documented access to the vehicle's interior, including its onboard systems. Following the collision, she observed behavior from Mr. Carter and his associates regarding the dashcam system that deeply concerned her. Before the vehicle was turned over for what was called a technical review, and while performing her contracted maintenance duties, Ms. Weber connected a personal device to the dashcam port and extracted a direct copy of the stored footage. The gallery erupted, not in loud shouting, but with that distinct charged energy that happens when dozens of people realize the truth at the exact same time. Carol brought the gavel down once. Clean, crisp, silence reclaimed the room. Daniel was already on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor! Chain of custody, authentication issues. This device was never disclosed through proper discovery channels. We have no way to verify." "Your Honor," Linda interjected smoothly, already moving. "The plaintiff concurrently submits a sworn affidavit from Diane Weber detailing the exact extraction process and timestamps, including a signed verification completed by Ms. Weber at the time of extraction, not after the fact. An authentication from an independent digital forensics examiner confirming the file is uncorrupted and matches the native format of the dashcam system, and documentation establishing that Ms. Weber first contacted plaintiff's counsel 48 hours ago after seeing news coverage of this trial. Unlike Exhibit 11C, every single link in this chain is fully signed and dated." She set a thick folder on the clerk's desk. "Chain of custody is completely intact. Under Rule 901(b)(9 of the Texas Rules of Evidence, a process or system showing accurate results, authentication is fully documented on the record." I took the folder from Carol and read that through every single page. The affidavit was clean. The forensic certification was exhaustive. The timestamp on the extracted footage matched the exact night of the crash down to the second. Under Rule 901, it was more than sufficient. The court admits the evidence. I ruled. We will take a 30-minute recess before viewing the footage. The gavel came down. During the next 30 minutes, people flooded out of the courtroom into the corridor in clusters. Journalists called their editors. Attorneys huddled in hushed, hurried whispers, and gallery spectators stood in small groups with the wide-eyed energy of people who knew they were witnessing something they'd be talking about for years to come. Daniel didn't step out into the hallway. He sat at the defense table, hands flat on the wood, staring fixedly at the black flash drive resting in the clerk's evidence tray. I walked into my chambers. Carol followed me inside and placed the drive on my desk. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. I looked at the drive, thinking about that Friday night on Westheimer Road, about James Miller, and about a 6-year-old girl in a helicopter high above Houston. "I've been preparing for 40 years, I said. Carol picked up the drive, walked to the door, and paused. "Richard," her voice was gentler than usual. "Whatever is on this drive, it's going to alter everything in that room." "I know," I said. She nodded and stepped out. In that quiet 30-minute window, sitting at my desk, I thought about the video about to play on the screen in courtroom 4. 37 minutes of footage. According to the forensic report, I already knew the first 5 minutes contained the collision, the red light, the violent impact, and a man dying on Westheimer Road. What happened at the 6-minute mark was what I hadn't been able to stop thinking about since reading the report at midnight, and in 20 minutes, no one else would be able to stop thinking about it either. 37 minutes of footage. The first 5 minutes told the story of a man's death. The 6th minute revealed the man who decided what that death was worth. The screen was massive. The courtroom projector lowered from the ceiling for the occasion, filling the wall right behind the witness stand. Every single person in the room had an unobstructed view. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her machine as a heavy physical silence settled over the gallery. I offered a slight nod to Carol, and she started the video. The initial minutes matched the forensic reports perfectly. Friday night, on Westheimer Road. The wide-angle lens of the dashcam captured the lanes ahead, the traffic signals, the ordinary machinery of a city moving through its evening. Then came the sudden acceleration, the red light, the impact, violent, absolute, and instantaneous. Sarah Miller let out a soft, involuntary sound, a tiny gasp, as if something had struck her in the chest. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, and Sarah pressed her fist tight against her mouth, her shoulders trembling once, twice, before locking rigid as she forced herself to keep watching. My eyes remained fixed on the screen, my hands resting flat on the bench. Minute 4. The vehicle came to a complete stop, its engine still idling. Through the dashcam's built-in microphone, a standard feature confirmed by the forensic report, we could hear Michael Carter's rapid, ragged breathing, the sound of a man whose body realized what had happened long before his mind could process it. Minute 5. Carter's voice came through, low and broken. "Oh God, oh God." Then, his phone connected to the vehicle's Bluetooth system. The dashcam microphone captured both sides of the call with cold, digital clarity. 1 ring, 2 rings, and then Daniel's voice filled courtroom 4. His tone speaking to Michael was calm, direct, and unhurried. Not the voice of a man woken from sleep, but the voice of a man who had been sitting up waiting. "Listen to me carefully. Do not get out of the vehicle. Do not hand your phone to anyone. Do not consent to transferring any data from the vehicle's internal systems. When the officers arrive, you say only 2 things: that you require medical attention and that you need your attorney present before answering any questions. Do you understand me?" Carter's voice cracked with panic. "Daniel, there's a guy out there. I don't think he's moving. I think he's Michael." The tone hardened, a sharp blade beneath the smooth exterior. "Do exactly as I say. I'm on my way." The call ended, but the video kept playing. On screen, through the windshield, we could see the first emergency lights appearing in the distance, red and blue flashing from the east, roughly 2 minutes away. Carter sat inside his Escalade. He didn't step outside. He didn't dial 911. He didn't walk over to the man lying on Westheimer Road. He just sat there, waiting for his lawyer. There was no sudden outrage in the courtroom, no loud commotion. What happened was far quieter and vastly worse. A collective exhaling of breath as 50 people released what they had been holding inside, followed by a stillness so complete I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling vents. I let the video play to the very end, all 37 minutes. I owed that much to James Miller, and I owed it to Sarah. When it finished, Carol turned off the monitor, leaving the blank screen glowing softly white. Daniel hadn't moved an inch. He sat at his table, hands flat, his face beyond pale, completely drained of all color. It was the face of a man watching the entire architecture of his life collapse from the foundation up, too fast to stop, too total to salvage. I leaned forward toward the microphone. Let the record reflect. My voice echoed into every corner of the room, that this recording raises grave questions regarding potential obstruction of justice and conduct unbecoming an officer of the court. In violation of the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct, these matters will be referred immediately to the State Bar of Texas and the Harris County District Attorney's Office for independent review. I looked over at the jury box. The jury will now deliberate on the question of liability regarding Michael Carter. The gavel came down. Sarah Miller stood up, her legs slightly unsteady. Her attorney caught her elbow, and Sarah held onto his forearm for a brief moment, just a second, before standing tall. She smoothed her hands down her trousers, staring at the blank screen that had just shown the final moments of her husband's life. An expression passed across her face, not relief nor victory, but the quiet, exhausting arrival of finally being believed. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 14 minutes. I sat in my chambers, not touching the phone. Everything that followed belonged to 12 strangers and a reckoning 40 years in the making. 3 hours and 14 minutes. Carol knocked at 2:17 p.m. "They're back," she said simply. The jury foreperson, a woman in her 50s who pushed her reading glasses to the top of her head, stood up and announced the verdict in just a few words. "We find for the plaintiff." Sarah Miller went completely still for the space of a single breath. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out the framed photograph she had brought in that morning. Her husband smiling into the camera, and pressed it tight against her chest, weeping softly. It was the kind of weeping that happens when a profound wrong is irreversibly righted, quiet, complete, and entirely stripped of performance. I read the formal judgment into the record, referred Daniel's conduct to the Texas State Bar, and submitted the obstruction of justice matters to the district attorney. Then I removed my robe and hung it on the rack in my chambers one last time. I was halfway down the main corridor when he caught up to me. "You planned this whole thing." Daniel's voice was raspy, stripped of every layer of polish. I stopped and turned around. He looked like a man unraveling, coat open, tie loose, carrying the distinct wreckage of someone who had built his entire identity on never losing. "I issued proper legal rulings," I said. "Every objection you won was because you were legally in the right. That is what fairness looks like. You simply failed to recognize it because you spent your entire career looking for ways around it." "You ruined me," his voice cracked on the last word. "My career, everything." "No," I said, keeping my tone entirely steady. "Every choice that brought you to this moment was yours alone. I simply ensured you made those choices in front of the right audience." His jaw twitched, his eyes bright with desperation. "Say something else. Fight back. You can't just walk away." I took one final look at him, the man who had stood on the courthouse steps that morning telling an old man to go home. "The court judged what you did," I said softly. "Life will judge who you chose to be." I turned my back and walked away without looking back. Emily was waiting at the end of the corridor with Olivia, a small hand held tightly in her mother's. Emily took 2 steps toward me, closed the remaining distance, and wrapped her arms around me without saying a word. I felt her exhale against my shoulder, a long, trembling breath of pure relief. "Dad," she whispered, just that single word. Then a little hand reached up and squeezed mine. Olivia looked up at me with her mother's eyes and said the only thing left to say, "Grandpa, let's go home." The 3 of us walked through the heavy doors of the courthouse together out into the crisp October afternoon, Olivia in the middle, holding my hand on her right and her mother's on her left. In November, Emily signed her divorce papers. On Christmas Eve, she and Olivia came over to my house. Roasted chicken, rosemary, and the cozy warmth of home. Olivia rambled on about a street dog she named Cookie, and Emily laughed, a real genuine laugh for the first time in years. I placed a holiday card on the mantelpiece right next to Margaret's photograph. Inside was Emily's handwriting. "To the greatest judge in my life. With love, Emily and Olivia." "She's home, sweetheart," I whispered to the photo. "They're both home." I spent 40 years deciding right from wrong for people I had never met. But the most vital case of my entire life was sitting at my kitchen table, laughing hysterically over something I barely caught, and calling me Grandpa as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I suppose it always was. If this journey taught me anything, it's that silence is not patience. Keeping quiet when the people you love are hurting isn't wisdom. It's fear wearing a polite mask. I wore that mask for 6 long years, far too long. Don't make the mistake I made. Speak up before the damage becomes permanent. Don't convince yourself that distance is protection when it's really just an excuse to avoid the fight. The people who love you need your presence. They don't need you to be perfect or invincible. They just need you to show up. I believe the universe placed that courtroom duty in my hands at the exact right moment. Not a day early, not a day late. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking justice for Emily and the right to be believed for a woman named Sarah Miller. Those are two very different things, and the distinction matters far more than people realize. Here is the personal truth I've arrived at after 70 years on this earth. The law can restore what was stolen, but only love can restore the people who were lost. I found my daughter again. The verdict was merely the simplest part of the journey.